All right, we'll get started here. Um, I'm sorry, I'm not usually this heat. I have to walk from biology to Cedar Hall, which is like, you guys know where that's at, and then all the way back here, back to back. So I'm just like, I need a shower so bad right now. I'm Professor Landis. This is ECON E371, so hopefully you're in the right spot. I actually have two sections, so I have one right before this. So luckily for you guys, I should, if I don't forget to do anything, I already have it ironed out, so you guys kind of get the benefit of me going through the other section first. Today we'll pretty much be kind of going through the syllabus. I'll do a little bit, touch on some like review of some stuff. So most of you hopefully have had 370, yeah? Seeing a lot of nods, or at least an equivalent, right? So I'll be doing some review of a lot of the stuff you learned. So basically everything you learned in that class we'll probably cover within like the first 2 weeks, right? So I'll review it, but we're going to be going through it kind of quick, right? But I review it in a way that I don't assume that you like have retained every single, all the knowledge. I'll try to walk through it, as slow as I can while still giving us enough time to cover the additional topics we need to in this class, okay? How many, just out of curiosity, because my last section, I don't know, first of all, only like half of them showed up, so that's not a good start, but they were also, it's like pulling teeth. But how many of you did linear regression in 370? Do you remember that term? Some couple nods, okay. I mean, not in depth, probably not in depth. How many of you had, any of you had me this summer? Okay. I taught 370 this summer. So one thing I'll mention that I don't have in the slides in the syllabus that I kind of forgot about, I'm just going to leave it up there because I had some people actually already asked me, like, I don't feel really good about my background. What can I do to like get it better? I'm also spoiling. I'm doing things out of order, but it's okay. Oh, okay. I got it. Also, we don't need sounds. So if you go to, and some of you might already have noticed, I have Zoom up. I'm not going to allow like anyone to join Zoom during class, but I just use it because it's a pretty low cost way of me recording these lectures. Now, when I say recording these lectures, it only records my screen, right? Anytime I do anything, and I will use the dot cam to do a lot of work, you won't see that, right? So it's not a perfect substitute for class. In fact, once again, I don't allow you to join it during class. It's more so to be there after class if you ever want to go back, right? Or, if you miss a class or something like that, I understand that it's going to happen throughout the semester. You'll have this as an additional resource. At least there's nothing there. I think that's pretty fair. But if you search Professor Landis, and I've got a YouTube link to this specific course, this section in the syllabus and in the slides, I believe, week 1 slides. We'll see once we get there if I'm lying about that or not. But if you I say the easiest way, just search Professor Landis. I'm the first one that shows up. See, I don't always also dress down as much, but there was no way today. I'm not wearing shorts, so and a polo. So we've got playlists. You'll notice all my 370 stuff is still all up there. So if you need some review, and it's kind of, I've got some Excel work that won't really apply as much to this class, but, descriptive statistics, probability, I've got it kind of sectioned off to where you can probably find some topics if we go through them too quickly in class. You can find them there, kind of get a little bit more in depth if you need a little bit more than what we did in this first, like I said, this first 2 weeks, we'll be doing a lot of quick review, okay? There's also this section's playlist. If you click on that, there's a video already there. It's going to be a help of how to get SCADA downloaded to your computer. That's a program that we'll be using. I'm going to walk us through it at the end of class today anyways, but just in case you didn't bring your laptop today, that help file will be out there. And this is where I'll post after every class. I'll post those daily recordings of the class period. I'll throw them up on this playlist on YouTube, okay? Any questions on that before we keep moving here? All right. So you kind of notice on Canvas, I've got these week 1 slides up there. I've got the syllabus, and I've got this background survey. I'll mention this again at the end of class, but that's one thing. It's not for points, but it helps me cater this class a little bit more towards you, right? So it's just kind of asking you some, what your background is, kind of, I think I forget exactly every single question, but it's like, are you with freshmen stuff? There probably aren't any freshmen, are there? No, all right, so you guys hopefully got your stuff together a little bit more than my B251 students at this point. So But it just asks kind of what your math background is, kind of some interests. So we're going to use a lot of data in this class. And I want to bring in examples that are going to interest a larger portion of you. So I don't want to bring, if nobody's interested in, health related topics, I don't want to bring in some health data that's not as interesting. So, some of that just kind of helps me cater the class a little bit more. So if you don't mind getting on and getting that done by the end of the week, I greatly appreciate that. And then after, I'll say this again, when we work through and I show you how to get it downloaded to your computer, but you will need to make sure that you can work, open Stata and work with it on your laptop by the end of this week as well, because starting next week, I'll kind of expect that you're able to. Okay. I'll mention that again. Like I said, I'm going a little bit out of, oops, not what I wanted. There we go. All right. So, so class overview. So what are we going to need for this class, right? So I already kind of alluded to, I'm going to use Canvas, right, to put all the files, all the data files we'll use. I'll also use the announcement feature, like to post anything that, say, in between classes, I need to like, I don't know, let's say I forgot something or I want something to change. I'll use that to kind of converse with you outside of class. Or if I mention things in class that I think are important, I'll likely also post Canvas announcements that kind of line up with that as well. If you want a book, it's a good book like this. I mean, these are on YouTube, but I don't think anyone's going to care and watch it. So, but to be honest with you, the university makes us assign a book, right? So if it left to me, I don't really need a book. But this is a good book. But it's probably more in depth and detailed than we're even going to get into. If you want to have it as an additional resource, it does have some like end of the chapter type questions that are good additional practice. I would not go out and get the 4th edition. It's the same thing as the 2nd and the 3rd edition. Well, it's basically the same thing that you can just make more money and then bring on a new edition, right? So if I go out, whatever your used textbook site that you've used is, try to find that 2nd or 3rd edition. You can probably get it for a lot cheaper than buying this new one. So if you do want that, I don't know if I necessarily advise it, especially if money is a thing. I hate asking students to spend money. You're already spending a lot to be here. So the other thing though, I'm asking you to spend money here, but I think most of you probably have some type of a tablet or laptop. So I say smartphone. If you want to follow along with me and use Stata, you can't use your phone. But if you do, so I don't think this hopefully doesn't apply to many of you. If you have a problem with having a laptop open in front of you as a distraction in class, even if we're going to be using programs on it, you have tabs open with, I don't know, ESPN or whatever your interest is. If you know it's a distraction, you don't want to use it, and you just want to really focus on what I'm doing instead of, that's fine. I hopefully we've matured enough to where that you can have everything closed so that it's not a distraction. But if you really did or forgot it for some reason, I'm going to use some in-class quizzes, and they're going to all be operating off of Canvas. So to answer those, you technically could use your phone. So that's why I have the smartphone up there. If you don't have your laptop with you that day, you can kind of get on and answer those questions. And the way I'll do those quizzes, and I'll talk about them more in a little bit, but they're random. I don't tell you when they're going to be. Sometimes at the beginning, sometimes in the middle, the end of class. So kind of have to be in class to know when I'm going to open it up for like 5 minutes, because it's only like a question or two usually. It's a way for me to kind of motivate and incentivize you as econ majors. I'm tying some additional marginal benefit to showing up to class, right? Because I think it's really, I know how important attending class is. You start falling behind the missing class in this course, and it nosedives pretty quickly. Okay, so you've kind of thrown a little bit of incentive with those in-class quizzes, but you can, we're using those on Canvas. You can use your smartphone, your tablet, or your laptop for those. I would have some type of a calculator, a for function. I say, we might be taking some things to powers later on in the semester. So just a basic calculator should kind of cover us, especially for that midterm and the final, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. And then I always post on Canvas the weekly lectures. So this week I put up the complete version. A lot of the times I'll put up what I call a skeleton version, where I pull some things out of it, just because it's things I might not want you to see ahead of time, because it'll force you to think a little bit harder about what we're talking about in class and hopefully learn the material a little bit better because of that. You can already see it there. Sometimes it doesn't have the same lasting effect. Okay. So after Thursday's classes, though, I'll always post a complete version of the slides with the stuff that I left out. I've already mentioned these class recordings. I've got the link up here. Once again, I showed you how to kind of search for that. So those will always be out there. These are going to be our main kind of materials. Okay. So what do you care about? How can you get the grade you want? So hopefully the grade you want is an A, but if it's not, at least you'll know what areas you can fail at to not get that A. So that was a terrible joke, but there's a final and a midterm. They're both worth 32%. So I understand a pretty heavy amount of this course is based on the exams, right? So that means the exams are really important, which means I will also, for each one, have a class period devoted to simply reviewing for the exam. I'll have a practice exam out for each of those. It'll be very representative of the types of questions that you'll see, right? But you'll have to want to take these very seriously. I have them in a later slide, but the dates of that midterm and the final are in the syllabus. They're also on a later slide. So if you have any, if you know in advance you're going to have any type of conflict with those exam dates, you need to let me know as far in advance as you possibly can. When you let me know about things ahead of time, I can often allows me to work with you and figure out something, come up with a plan. You let me know after the exam's already been taken, everyone knows the questions. Now people might go, I have to write a whole nother exam for you. It's a lot more difficult. So if you know you're going to have a conflict, let me know as far in advance as possible. Okay. I guess maybe this is a good time to bring up. I'm saying that I will, I practice what I preach. So I'll let you know something I know of in advance, which is we might have a disruption later on in the semester. Probably hopefully in November, but my wife's pregnant, so I may have to cancel class. So if once again, those Canvas announcements, I'll get that out as soon as possible. But that might be something that causes us some disruptions later on in the semester. I don't have a date for it yet. It's supposed to be November 20th, but I doubt it'll work out. So I'll let you know well in advance. I hope you will do the same for me, okay? You'll also have not weekly quizzes, they're generally bi-weekly. So there's going to be 6 of them. There'll be 3 before the midterm, 3 after, right? They're 12% of your grade. Problem sets, you'll have 3 of those before the midterm, 3 after, right? So those are going to be a little bit more heavily weighted. So the way I'll kind of talk about these different categories is the quizzes are open note. They're meant to be representative questions of what you would see like on the exam. Obviously, you have your notes in front of you, and you have whatever notes you took during class. Once you start them, you'll have 60 minutes to complete them. They're generally around 12 questions. So, I taught this in the spring. Generally, didn't have anyone having timing issues. I can see how long it took everybody for their submission. A lot of them are well in advance of that 60-minute cutoff. These are meant to be an area where I have to think of grades, or I explain them this way. Maybe as econ people out of. So if you have like a production function and the output is your grade, it's the main 2 inputs are going to be your ability, but also your effort, right? So you have all the ability in the world. If you don't show up to class and you don't turn assignments in, you're not going to have very good production in this class, right? So I try to build in some areas in this class where effort can kind of help increase your production or increase your grade. So these, once again, if you take them seriously, these quizzes, and you sit down with your notes in front of you, you have everything ready to go, and you've looked at the practice problems, I think these should be an area where that effort will translate into a grade, right? And I also try to write these quizzes in a way that I'm not making you do them just for the hell of it, right? If you do take them seriously, I think that in studying for those quizzes, that is also going to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because that's going to be, show up on your exam as well, right? The fact that you were learning the material better for the quizzes, you're going to have that knowledge up on the exam, more likely to perform better on that exam, okay? Problem sets are also really, I think, highly effort-based. As long as you time manage, and most of these, the quizzes and the problem set, the quizzes are a little bit different. When I assign the quizzes, you'll have like a 6-day window. I'll put them up after class Thursday. You'll have until we meet the next class on Tuesday just to get those done. But the problem sets, you'll often have at the bare minimum a week and a half, if not closer to 2 weeks for some of them to kind of get those done. Well, probably not quite 2, about a week and a half is generally probably the average time that I'll give you for those. As we get towards the end of the semester, we have topics that take a little bit longer. And so I may give you a little more time for those later problem sets. But I want to give you time because I want you to get started on them early. If you run into problems, you can reach out to me during office hours, during class, we can kind of go over things, or before or after class. So I think if you put effort and take these seriously, a lot of that 24%, a lot of that you can get get a lot of those points. Now I do grade these relatively rigorously, but if you come to me ahead of time, like, and we're working on this, you can get the vast majority of those points. Right? So that's really 3 components to this class. We'll have those problem sets, which is going to be focused just using on Stata, right? The quizzes are going to be a little bit less of like state output, although I'll give you some, and this will make sense more as we kind of get further in the semester. You'll see some state output, but you'll also just be asked some general questions about the topics that we're covering. And then the exams, I'm not going to actually have you use Stata. Once again, I might give you some output, right? But it's more so going to be focused on kind of the answering questions over the topics that we've talked about or output that you would get from Stata. Okay. Questions in this before I keep moving. All right. So I've probably already mentioned a lot of this, but the quizzes will basically be every 2 weeks, with the exception of around when we have the midterm, or we won't have them then. So they'll be about every 2 weeks. I'll probably put the first one out next week after Thursday's class. It should be review, and probably one of the easier quizzes. But if you do need to do some brushing up, like I said, I've got my old videos out there. I'm sure if you just look at general probability and statistics, throw that into Google, you can find a lot of resources if you're a little bit worried about kind of brushing up on the material from 3.7. Okay. All right, so I also mentioned these in-class quizzes. So attendance isn't required, but there'll be 10 random classes that I use throughout the semester. So originally, up to this point, you're probably like, geez, exams, problem sets, quizzes, like, there's no like low-hanging fruit, easy points in this class. But like I said, I want those problem sets for you to be able to kind of work with 24% in a small chunk. Quizzes are open notes. Okay? But I also have these in-class quizzes that every one that you answer, right? Every time you're in class, you answer them, you're going to get 0.5%. Right? So that doesn't sound like much, but if I use them 10 times, it's a total of 5%, right? So that means you could get an 85, and if you show up to every single class and answer every single question on these in-class quizzes, you're gonna end up with a 90, A minus. So that can bump you up quite a bit. Okay, so I'll use these questions, sporadically. I'm not going to announce them. It's kind of the. Have any of you? I don't remember at the undergraduate level that if you have like a behavioral economics. Have you heard of economic experiments? You have. So it's really cool the way that you get people to. You can manipulate people is like you tell them something's going to happen, but you give them a probability, but they don't know when it's going to happen. Like you can tell them it's going to end in, you spin a wheel, and if the number comes up as over 30, and the numbers only go from 0 to 40, if it comes up above 30, we'll stop the experiment. So you never know when it's going to stop, but you know that every time there's like a 70 or a 25% chance that it's going to stop, right? Same kind of idea. I'm not going to tell you when they are, but you know that, I don't know, take however many class periods we have, and take 10 divided by that, and that's the probability that I'll use those in-class questions that day, okay? That's a little bit nerdy, but here we are, right? So I already mentioned we'll have 6 problem sets as well. You are expected to do, and I might ask you questions where you do have to like write out responses in Word. So a lot of times for these assignments, you'll upload what I'll show you later today. And hopefully by the time we kind of get to these, it'll be more familiar with what are called do files, right? That's part of Stata. And then also sometimes a Word document as well, answering some of the questions. So a lot of the times what I'll have you do is anything I ask in these problem sets, you should have to do it in Stata, but then you might then have to like report and write out what's result you got. Right? And that'll make, like I said, more sense when we start working through these examples. But you shouldn't be thinking about these as something you're going to sit down and like write out. You're going to be using Stata to complete these problem sets. Okay. So this class is kind of 2 components. One, learning the theory behind, basically, I mean, mostly going to be doing just regression techniques the entire semester. So learning the theory and learning exactly why we're using these different techniques, but then also how to implement it, right? Because that's really what's important. I mean, for instance, we'll talk about in a second. Everyone remembers what a mean is, right? Or an average. You can calculate an average by hand, but if you've got a couple 100,000 people in a data set, it's going to take you a long. You want a program to do that, right? So that's what's really what we're going to be doing in this class, right? Is how do we work with actual data? Right? Also, I updated these slides. I changed the percentage from the spring to give you guys a little bit more from the problem sets and not the exams because I wanted to kind of reward effort a little bit more. So I forgot to change that and I forgot to update it on my OneDrive. So I put these important dates up here. They're at the very end of the syllabus as well. And these are like university add drop withdrawal dates. The midterm and the final are really what's important. I know I don't love 8 a.m.s either, but this is the time slot assigned to us for the university. So our final is going to be on Tuesday at 8. So yeah. Is it Thursday? Is that the 17th? The 19th.
19th.
Well, thank
The
you.
wrong section.
Oh, I have the wrong section pulled up. Yep, you're right. Yeah, so yours is Thursday, but it's still at 8, right? 10? Okay. Well, I'll update this slide after class. Thanks for catching that. I think I have the sections mixed up, right? I'll get that updated in the syllabus and the slides, so that you can make sure if you have a conflict with those dates. I know the midterms, right? But any other questions before I kind of keep moving? I want to give us a little bit of time to get material, but also then to try to get Stata working on our devices. Okay. So how can you succeed in this class? The main way, I think, is going to be attending, but some other tools or tricks that I think will help. And I say read the book, probably less of the book and more of just glancing at the slides. So for instance, next week's slides, I'll get posted after class Thursday, just kind of skimming through those, even if like on Monday or before class on Tuesday. Just, I always think of it this way, like it's a lot, lectures are a lot more efficient if you've been primed, even just if nothing else for the terminology that's going to be used, right? Just not wasting brain energy on things that you, oh yeah, I saw that word. Like, and you don't have, like, I'm not saying have a perfect understanding of the material coming to class, but just kind of skimming through, seeing kind of what we're going to be doing, where we're kind of going for the week. I think that'll help a lot. And you can read through the book as well. But really, this class's book, like I said, if it was up to me, I would say it's our lecture slides. Right? That is our okay. Show up. I've already kind of talked about this a little bit. I've just seen, yeah, you miss a couple classes and everything builds on itself in this semester, and it's just so hard to climb back up. So I can't stress that enough. If you do miss a class, make sure you're keeping up on the material so that you don't start snowballing. Right? Practice. So I mentioned this, I think, earlier. There are end of the chapter questions in the book. If you don't want to get the book, I'm going to always put up some practice questions before those quizzes, and also I'll have practice exams. So that's always good to work through those problems. Also, when we're getting closer to exams, working through the problem sets again will also be something good. The in-class questions, I'll be completely honest, a lot of the times I help you work through those, right? Those are supposed to be effort-based points for attending, right? Showing up, right? But those will also be good questions to go back and review to, like, just because I helped you work through them in class, maybe you want to make sure you can go back and answer them on your own as well, okay? So take the Canvas quizzes seriously. I also hit on this already. Like, sit down, be prepared, have already looked at those practice problems so you can kind of make sure you're getting those points to kind of help bolster your grade a little bit if you don't do as well in one of the exams. Okay. So this is also, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Let's say it is the quiz is due before class. I don't know. I don't know what you were doing, screwing around and you forgot and you were going to take it, but you're like, oh, it's I don't know, 10 o'clock. I need to get on and get this done, but you're not that prepared. I mean, a 50% is so much better than a 0. We'll talk about this when we talk about means here in a little bit, but zeros really pull down your grade, like really pull down an average. A 50 it's not great, but it doesn't have near as much an effect as that 0. So making sure you're getting those problem sets turned in, right? I mean, zeros for those problem sets are also, it's going to be daggers, right? So making sure you're getting something turned in for both the quizzes and the problem sets is crucial. Okay. Now, I'm not suggesting you just turn something in, like you should be focusing on it and putting a lot of time and effort into it, but you just don't want those zeros. I can't stress that enough, okay? Don't be afraid to ask questions in and out of class. So I tend to be, I don't know, a few with class. Sometimes I get to be kind of a fast talker. I kind of go things too quick. I get excited about things. So if I'm ever moving too fast or you have a question, always feel free to stop me. Also, I have my GAs and TAs now, so I'll get the slides updated with those as well. I think the syllabus might have them up there already. I didn't have that information until a little bit later this year. So they will have office hours as well. I believe they are having the option of, well, I'm gonna put up both. So one of them, I have two sections and they're two sections, two TAs, and they're technically assigned to one section. But I'm gonna tell you the office hours of both because it's, it's the same material. They're great. They're in grad school. The ones doing like crazy data simulation stuff that's so econometrically advanced, they'll be more than, they have more than enough ability to answer your questions. But one of them is going to try, I'm kind of test driving this semester, and I probably will end up asking you for feedback at the end, because I've heard that some students, I can see why some students might like it. One of them is going to do their office hours purely on Zoom, right? So they're going to have like created a link where you can always, at a certain, I forget the time slot that he's got reserved, you can get on and join his kind of Zoom room and ask him questions via Zoom. On a day like today, right? Maybe you don't want to hike across campus to Wiley Hall to ask questions in person, but then one of them also is going to have in person. So they're going to have, one of each, whichever one you kind of prefer. Like I said, I've gotten mixed feedback about some students kind of liking this idea of having a Zoom option for office hours for my assistants. And I'll probably ask you for feedback, what you prefer at the end of the semester. Okay. Also, default though, they're great. They're great. Default though, I would appreciate just default to me. Come stop by my office. Usually after this first week, it's going to be Monday, Wednesday from 12:30 to 3:30. I'll always be available. You can meet at a different time. If that doesn't work for you, you send me an email. We can probably find a time that works. I'm here on campus every single day, or most days. Occasionally I'll have like a conflict, but we can find something. I will always carve out the Monday, Wednesday, 12:30 to 3:30 after this week for office hours, right over in Wiley if you want to meet. Even if you want to just like meet kind of right after class or something, I'll be over there. It'd be also kind of a nice time slot. But yeah, this week though, a little bit different. I actually can't be on campus Wednesday, so I'm going to have my same office hour time, but it would have to be me via Zoom. I can't imagine that any of you are going to want to meet with me Wednesday, which is why I don't think it's a huge deal. But if we go over some material today or Thursday, and you want to meet during office hours, or I don't know, you just want to introduce yourself or kind of have some questions about Stata, I'm actually going to move my office hours. I will be here Friday from 12:30 to 3:30. Now, most Fridays, I probably will be here 12:30 to 3:30 as well. And I really wouldn't mind if you stop by. I'm just not going to promise every Friday because that's a time slot I use to schedule meetings and other things that I just can't promise that I will be in my office during that time slot. But Monday, Wednesdays after this first week will always be in that 3-hour time slot. Okay. So help me help you. I don't mind lecturing. I like it, but it's much more rewarding. And it's much, I like one-on-one kind of helping people a little bit more, and always, I find it enjoyable. That's the enjoyable part of my job. So if you want to stop by and you need help, I highly recommend you do. I think it's, hopefully most people have done that. If you know other people have taken this course, I think they find that to be an effective tool. Okay. Does anybody know anyone who's taken my course before? 1, 2, okay. Yeah, I had a few in my last section too. So I've only been here, this is my second year at the university. It's only my second semester teaching this specific course, but I was over at a different university for like 8 years before this teaching a similar thing. So got it pretty down, I think. And I find office hours to be pretty effective for this class. Does anybody know who this is from, by the way? I'm starting to feel older and older every year. Well, yeah, if you haven't watched these shows, it's gonna be a little older now, but great old Tom Cruise before he went off the reserve. So we'll walk through kind of some review a little bit here, and then I'll reserve enough time. Let's see how long have I been talking. Okay, to kind of make sure we can get Stata downloaded to our devices. Okay, it's a bit of a process. So the goal of this course is the estimating causal effects, right? So whenever we look at things, a lot of things can be correlated, right? So I don't think I have the example here, but I'll talk about a selection issue that we'll talk about selection issues later on the semester. But I just paint the picture. So what if I look at the data and it looks like the flu vaccine, people who get the flu vaccine are actually more likely to die. So flu vaccines causing people to die? Well, we got to take a step back, right? So we can see correlations. There's a negative correlation. You look at the data, there probably is a negative correlation between getting the flu vaccine and actually dying even from the flu. Because you got to think about who's getting a flu vaccine. How many of you have gotten a flu vaccine? This might backfire. So a handful of you. I don't get the flu vaccine. Why? I don't know. I get the flu. I'm probably not going to die. Right? I probably should get it. It's probably terrible that I'm not. But I'm not probably going to die if I get the flu. If I was 85, I can guarantee you I'd be getting the flu vaccine. Right? Because I know if I get the flu at 85, it might be the last time I get the flu. Right? So we've got to think about the selection of who's getting the flu vaccine. People who are probably at higher risk. Right? So, and maybe it's not just like age. Maybe it's like if I'm a nurse or I'm around a lot of students, I probably should have had the flu vaccine because I'm in contact with more people who are more likely to have the flu. Right? So just because we see correlations doesn't mean that it's a causal effect. Doesn't mean that the flu vaccine is a bad thing. Right? So we're going to talk about different methods and ways in which we can go from a correlated to variables being correlated to, is it actually a causal relationship, which is a lot more powerful. Okay? And we've got different techniques and tricks, right? So some other examples, anything about, our class sizes, they impact test scores. So I had this idea once. So for B251, I teach a couple of the 300-person lectures, but then like some of the TAs have their own, like once like the 4th and 5th year students, they'll have like a 30-person section. And I was like, you might look at that data and it looks like the students in the smaller sections don't do as well. But is it the class size? Every size 30 classroom is taught by a teaching assistant, a graduate student. Every one of the big lectures is taught by professor, someone who's been doing this for years. So you're going to definitely get different performance. Or maybe it was people that got into these smaller classes, maybe they were a little bit more on top of things, right? Scheduling, which might also be correlated with them having a little bit higher ability. So maybe that influenced it. So we might see correlations, might not be causal, and we'll have to talk about techniques we can kind of tease out a causal relationship from data. Some other questions just to think about that we can start answering. I think this is maybe shows the power if we can get causal relationships. So if you look at the data, we can say, okay, does the mortgage rate that someone's given, is that at all correlated with, or is it having a negative, well, actually in this case, be a positive relationship with what their race is? Right? Because if we find a causal effect there, we got to do something to stop that, right? No one should be getting a different mortgage rate based off of the color of their skin, right? So we can, pick up some really important questions just looking at data, because you can go off. I mean, it's harder to get mortgage data because a lot of it's private, but once you find a data set, or once you can get a company to share some data with you, if you can tease out that the individual's race is having any impact on the mortgage rate that they're given, I mean, we got issues there, right? We have to address this issue. Okay, so I'm trying to show kind of the importance of the types of questions we can answer. Also, do cigarette taxes reduce smoking? So we can start to also tease some pretty interesting things out from the data. So the economic intuition might originally be like, yeah, if it's tax something, people aren't going to buy as much of it, right? But why might there not be a causal relationship between cigarette taxes and smoking? It's very price inelastic. A lot of people that are still smoking cigarettes, you can double the price of a pack of cigarettes and they're going to keep smoking at the same rate, right? So, I mean, and that's not completely true. They do reduce it a little bit, but it's fairly inelastic. So these taxes don't look like they're as effective as what they actually might be, right? If you were to tax like a casual smoker, you might get a much larger effect than someone who's like habitual, right? We're also going to talk about, so a lot of these questions we can answer with what we call regression, right? So I think I've already asked you, but yeah, you touched on this idea of linear regression. We're going to dive deep into it in this class. Okay? We can also then, using this regression technique, we can also make predictions. Right? So this is pretty powerful to be able to predict things like, okay, looking at previous data, what would the predicted GDP for this current year be? Right? What would the predicted GDP for 2024 be based off of all the conditions we've seen in the past and what kind of levels of GDP those led to? Okay? So we'll talk more about how we make predictions based off of our regression output once we kind of get to that linear regression topic. So I'm also going to review some different types of data that we'll be working with. So I'll show you one of them today. We'll be looking at one data set, but I'll talk about 3 different types. So the first is cross-sectional. So cross-sectional data is when you have multiple subjects all recorded at one point in time. So maybe the variable that I'm interested in is what is your current, what is your what is every single student in this room's current GPA right now, right? At the same point in time that I'm collecting every single person's GPA, those are different subjects. But I'm recording it all at the same point in time. Now, time series data would be if I took you, right, and said, what was your GPA the last however many semesters you've been here? Well, now I have one subject, but I'm collecting data at multiple points in time. That would be time series data. And then if I match the two together, a lot of the data sets we'll be working with, because they're usually a little more interesting and a little more, we do a little more with them, are what we call panel data sets. So this is when I have every single person in this room, I have their GPA collected for the previous 4 semesters, multiple subjects, multiple points in time. Now, I also will typically only ever call this like observations or subjects, right? So if I thought about you guys in a data set, each person would be an observation or each person would be a subject. If you Google out there and you get more like a math intense, like linear regression explanation, they'll probably use this word elements. It's the same thing. It's just that I think the elements, I think the reason why they use that, it's something about like generate like AI generated data. It's not actual data. You call it elements because you're creating the data. But I'll typically say observations or subjects. Okay. So just to kind of get some more examples. Here I've got every single city, what their population was in 2020, right? And these are like, in this doesn't include the metro, if I remember right. So that's why they might look a little bit wrong. But this is one point in time, multiple subjects. So this is my cross-sectional data. Okay. I get that thing about, hey, well, why does this data set look a little different? It's still cross-sectional data. I've got multiple subjects, different countries. I've got one point in time, 2011, right? But I've got multiple columns now. Well, just because it's cross-sectional data doesn't mean I only have to have one variable. I can collect information on several different things. So here I've got a variable that is GDP per capita. So my columns here represent variables. Another variable, what the education expenditures were, the primary education expenditures, and then secondary education expenditures. So even with cross-sectional data, it can still look rather big if I have a lot of different subjects and a lot of different information I'm collecting or a lot of different variables. Okay. Time series data is going to look something like this, where I've got what looks like a variable, right, which is just what year it is, because it's all on one subject, the United States. It's what is the recorded unemployment rate in these different time periods, right? And we might not just see it by years. A lot of times we could even break this down to be months, right, or weeks or days, hours, if we really want to, like, you know, a lot of companies, you know, when you do anything, scan anything, like they're tracking the minutes and the seconds, like they, you know, pick up foot traffic and how many people are going in and out of different things. You'd be working with essentially time series data. It's really what they're looking at. Anyways, I digress. So the final one, panel data, which maybe this hopefully it's backfired in the last second. How many of you went to middle school in Indiana? Okay, I think this is about right, because this would be what, 11, so 13. No, this is going to be too late. Well, maybe some people even that are ahead of you. I have a bunch of old ISEP data. So if somebody went to school in Indiana in 2009 to 2011, I have their ISEP score, right? So I don't know who it is. The state won't give me names, but they'll give me, you can actually request, I think you probably could request the data. I don't think you have to be affiliated with like university. So here you can kind of notice I've got the same person, right? And I didn't include, like, here's their ID number, they're 1. I don't know what their actual name is, but here's student 1. For the 3 times they had to take the ISEP test, the 3 years, I've got their performance. And then I've got a second person's. For the 3 years they had to take the test, their performance, and a third person, and so on. So here I've got multiple subjects, multiple points in time, right? So once again, now it looks like I do have this additional variable, which is kind of recording what year that observation was collected in, or that subject's information was collected in. Questions on these types of data? This should be pretty straightforward, pretty easy. It's day 1, right? I'm not gonna kill you too much. So we'll do a little bit of review, and then we'll hop over to kind of look at how we get data downloaded to our computers. So just some notation that we'll start using. If I'm ever, whatever group I'm interested in, so let's say I'm interested in the drinking behaviors of Indiana University students, right? My population is every single Indiana University student. Right? So just because we use the word population, I think, we generally think about like the population of the US. Well, that's if I'm interested in the entire US's drinking habits, then that's my population. But if I'm interested in a much more narrow group, my population can be something much smaller, right? So just IU students. So capital N is going to be how we notate the total number of observations in our population data set. That's capital N. And I don't think I have it in this slide, but later on we talk about sampling, lowercase n would be if we had only a small subset. Maybe I only have 50 IU students, right? So, examples change. Maybe I'm interested in every US citizen, maybe every country, right? Maybe I, excuse me, have an example where I'm only interested in the average performance of different automotive firms. So every firm, every company would be in my population. Maybe I'm only interested in Indiana schools, so I don't care about any of the other states. I just want to get the data. My population data would just be every Indiana school. So it can kind of change quite a bit. We're also going to notate this random variable. And when we say a random variable, it's random in the sense that if I were to choose one of you at random, I know what range of values your GPA could be in. I don't know what your GPA is until I ask you or I look it up and write it down, right? So when we're looking at like a random observation or a random person, you think of it that way, this random variable is going to take on a specific value, but I don't know what that value is until I actually record it. Right? So we're going to call our random variable kind of capital Y. That's how I'll use the notation. Capital Y will be this variable that we want to collect information on. I want to collect everyone's GPA, but before I collect it, I don't know what your GPA is or what your GPA is, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So maybe I'm interested in like what the average test score of an Indiana school is. I know they could be, within whatever range that the I-STEP scores are. But I don't know exactly what the school's value is going to be until I actually go out and record or gather that data. Okay. So some basic review we're going to do. We're going to talk about some distributions. So does anyone remember what distributions you guys talked about in 370? Probably the main one was what? Normal distribution. Probably the normal distribution or standard normal distribution was probably pretty important. You then probably started to talk about maybe the student T distribution a little bit. So there's all these different distributions. Generally, those ones we just mentioned are symmetric, but they don't have to be, right? When we're looking at actual data, it can often be what we call skewed, right? But we'll start talking about different distributions here. So we'll start at a very basic level and then talk a little bit more about like skew and things like that. So all we're thinking about when we have a distribution is the likelihood of seeing different values for this random variable Y. Now, sometimes it's discrete, right? So we'll start out with discrete and then move to continuous. So maybe I'm interested in, for example, 10 kind of makes sense here. What's the probability that if I selected a household at random, they have 10 kids? It's possible. There's some of them out there. There's not a lot. So I know that probability is relatively small, right? But in that case, what's the probability they have one kid, right? Or this random variable Y is equal to 1 if I select a household at random. Well, it's going to be a little bit higher. Right? There's a lot of one-children households. So we can do this. The problem is, this is discrete, right? Hopefully I don't choose a house at random and they have 3.5 kids. That's not good, right? You should have only integer values. So there's going to be some variables which we can only see these integer values, okay? So, for example, when we're looking at student scores on the I-STEP, it's technically discrete because I can get a 350 or a 351. I can't get something in between, right? So my discrete distributions, I can still say, okay, how many students had 340? And how many students had in between 340 and 345? Or I could even make this more granular if I wanted to, and every single specific point value, I could count up the number of students and then figure out the probability of students that have that. Or I can think about maybe I have a continuous distribution, right? So maybe I'm not interested in individual students, but what if I'm interested in, if I choose a school at random, what is their average I-STEP score? Well, now if I'm looking at a school, their average could be 341.3579142, right? It could be anything. So there I'm going to get this much more nice continuous distribution, right? I can see all the different values, in any decimal level, or any decimal, like out the hundredth or thousands or whatever. So this is going to be kind of our difference visually of a discrete or a continuous distribution. So just reviewing some more notation, probably from 370, or maybe they didn't really focus on this too much. Are any of you in Greek life here? Does anyone recognize what this symbol is? Sigma, right? So, or Greek life, Greek organization, right? Business fraternities, they all use Greek lettering. So this summation sign is going to tell us, okay, whatever's on the right-hand side of this, take that and add it up from the very first from the value of 1 all the way up to 5. So in general, we're not talking about data. It would be like, okay, take the number 2, then add to it, go to I equal to, add to that 2. So now I've got 4. Go to the third one. So I'm adding another 2. I'm at 6. Go to the fourth one, adding another, I'm at 8. Go to the fifth one. That's where I stop. Now that I've added that, I get a value of 10. Now we aren't really going to use it with like numbers and things like that. We're going to use it with identifying the value of different observations. So start with the very first observation in your data set. Whatever your random variable y is, kind of notate this with lowercase because we're now talking about one specific person's value for y. So go to the very first person's value for y. So let's say I want to know what the total, I don't know, let's say I want to know what the total hours spent studying of this classroom was. I would go to my first person, record how many hours they spent studying. Then go to the second person, add how many hours they spent. Then go to the third, all the way up until I get to the very last person in this classroom, right? Or the very last person in that population data. So we'll use this summation sign when we're calculating things like, I'll skip ahead here. Oh, there it is. The mean, right? So you'll kind of notice that's exactly what's in our mean equation. We're going to add up everybody's total hours studied. So this should represent the total number of hours studied by everyone in this class. Then to make that a mean, I'm just going to divide that by, well, how many people were in the class? That should give me my average or my mean number of hours studied. So we'll be using this summation sign in a lot of different statistics that we're calculating. So the first one, the mean, or we sometimes call this an expected value. Since this random variable y is something that can take on different values, we say, well, based off the data, this is the expected value of y. I know that on average, you studied 2.5 hours a week, right? But if I choose any person at random, they might have 3 hours, 0 hours, right? So this should hopefully look familiar. When we start talking about different statistics, anytime we write out a Greek letter as representing our statistic, which this is mu, right? That's going to represent our population mean. So think of Greek is population. Anytime we're talking about samples, that's where we're going to use kind of like an alphanumeric or the English language we would write. In fact, the mean is, we're just going to write as X bar. So it looks a little bit different, right? We're using an X there. We're using actual like our English lettering. Okay. But Greek lettering always representing population statistics. So here, our population mean kind of is based off this equation. Now we don't want to do this by hand. We'll kind of see if we can actually do things like this in Stata. I don't think we'll get there today of how we calculate means, but next class for sure. Okay. We can also do expected values of discrete random variables. So this is going to be where we take the different possible values we can see. So maybe I use like my kids in the household example. That's okay. Take the value of 0, multiply that by the probability that the household has 0 kids. Then add to that if there's 1 kid in the household times the probability there's 1 kid. Then add to that 2 kids times the probability there's 2 kids. And if I add all those up, that should give me my mean of a discrete random variable. Now the reason why is because kind of floating behind the scenes there, if I'm calculating a probability, so let's say I have 10 out of 40 people in this room, I don't know, did some activity that was whatever one of the examples, right? So 10 out of 40 is what we want. Well, that probability is 0.25, right? So what was I really doing there? Well, 10 over 40, I was dividing by the population size. So anytime we're using probabilities, that divided by n is kind of floating floating around there behind the scenes, okay? We really won't do too much with discrete variables. I'm just kind of doing a quick review of some things that we might talk about. Another measure of central tendency is the median. So why might the mean not be a great measure of what the average or what the middle part of the data is? So if I think about something like income data, if someone makes, let's say I want to find the average of all of your parents' income, all right? If one of your parents is Elon Musk, what's going to happen to the mean? he's built, multi-billionaire, it's gonna pull it way up, right? But if I calculate a median, that's gonna be the value of everyone's parents' income, where there's 50% of the data is on the left, 50% or 50% is below, 50% is above. Well, now it doesn't matter if that the richest person's parent makes 300,000, a million, a billion, just counts as one observation. So when we have smaller data sets, sometimes we want to rely a little bit more on the median. Or if we have really skewed data sets, which is kind of when I'm giving this example where you might have these really large values, the mean is going to be a little bit less reliable for us, okay? And then the mode, we won't use this too much, but just to kind of refresh some stuff you talked about, this would be the value that happens most often in our data set. Right, so if I'm looking at like the household kid example, I'm going through, okay, what's the most common number of kids in a household, right? Maybe it's one, I don't know what it is. I think it's probably 1 or 0 would be my guess, right? Any questions on this? Won't hit on this when we get there again. I introduced the normal distribution, but with a standard normal distribution, what happens with all three of these things? Does anybody remember? So if it's a standard normal distribution, we say it's symmetric. So each side looks exactly the same. We actually end up with the mean being the same as the median, and it's the highest point of the distribution. It's also the value that occurs most. They're all the same value, right? I'll hit back on that again. I'm just kind of throwing some things in here and there. Excuse me. Excuse me. All right. So you have the advantage that you're getting me after I've already taught a similar lecture. You're also getting me after my third lecture in a row, so my voice might start going. So we'll stop here with material. I want to make sure we save some time. If you've got your laptop with you, let's walk through trying to get Stata kind of downloaded and workable on it on your device, and then I'll kind of do some very basic, show you some very basics of Stata. So it's going to be a bit of a pain. I'm going to do a lot of this work before class typically starts, but I have to redo it every single time because they wipe these computers every day. You guys hopefully won't have that problem. If we can get it down today, you don't have to do the first part of this ever again, okay? So I think I have, oh, I didn't throw it up there, but I'll throw it up there now because I know that I've got it somewhere. Throw it up there now. Maybe. This is just for, hopefully you won't need to look at this document, but if someone missed class or you weren't able to get today, this will be kind of what we're going to go through step by step. Also, that first video that I had up in there on the YouTube playlist already, this kind of is going to walk through, although I think it's missing a slight part of what we're going to be doing. Excuse me, but it's a good thing to go back to reference if you ever have problems, get a new computer throughout the semester or something like that. So we'll go to this one.iu. So the very first thing that we're going to have to do, we're going to search cloud storage here and go down and click on this cloud storage button. So this is all from one.iu.edu. I'm then going to log in using my IU credentials. I think also a lot of this is going to automate it for me since I'm already signed into the computer. Hopefully it'll do that for you as well. But if not, use your IU email address. Everything we're doing should be using an IU email address so they can kind of sync everything up correctly, right? Now, notice I already have a check mark here, right? So you should hopefully see this OneDrive-IU. So how many people are at this point? Are some of us seeing it? Yeah? So you probably don't have a green check mark, right? So if you go over here, mine says deauthorize. I'm not doing that because I don't want to screw it up. And you should have an authorize button, right? If you hit authorize, it should then show a green check mark next to that OneIU or OneDrive-IU. Is that working so far?
Does it have to be OneDrive-IU or can you use like
I am not the most tech savvy person. I think that there's a reason why it's important that you use the OneDrive-IU and not the personal. Like I said, I don't know exactly why. It's something about, I think because data is, so the program we're using, you're not actually downloading it. We're working off of like a cloud system, like you're using a universal license. And so there's something about using the IU versus the personal that screws with it. That's not a perfect explanation, but All right, so everybody with me up to this point, any questions? Okay. All right, we're gonna then go back to 1.IU and search IU anywhere. And where is spelled WARE, like warehouse. So that should be that person that pops up. I'm gonna click on it. Also, I would not give it 4 stars, and we'll see why here in a little bit. But IU anywhere login. You should see this thing where you have to detect, and if you maybe use other programs, you might not have this step. You might already have kind of Citrix downloaded, but for most of you, probably you would see this. You need to detect Citrix workspace. Okay. I'm gonna hit OK. I'm gonna open it. And mine's gonna pop up. I don't think that's what's gonna happen for most of you, right? So, in fact, someone must have already downloaded it on this computer earlier. So can I? Oh, the bummer. Well, you'll have to remind me. I can kind of do this from memory. So once you clicked on, you guys won't see this right away. You'll have something that downloads in the top right corner. Or look like a program. You need to click on that. It'll kind of download Citrix. Right? You'll then need to go back to IU anywhere. Log in again. It will show up on the screen where it looks like you have to detect Citrix again. You're like, well, what? I already downloaded it. And it might prompt you to put your email address into something. That's not, just ignore that, right? You go back to IU anywhere once you've downloaded Citrix and you click on the program to run it. You hit detect again, and then it should send you to this screen. Okay. Did anybody get here yet? So then we get the program to download. Yes. Did you click on it on your download so that it ran?
I already have seen that.
Oh, okay. Well, then that doesn't help, right? No, I'm just joking. Yeah, I think, let me think if I can I get rid of this real quick so I can show you this? I wouldn't have thought someone had already used it, but downloads. I don't think it lets me access the downloads. It doesn't. So why? Oh, here. This is gonna be our workaround. I will try to explain this to get as many of us together or through it today. And I will post the video from my other section where Citrix wasn't downloaded on the computer yet, so that you can kind of see how to walk through it. So once you clicked on that detect, how many of you got that kind of download in the upper right corner? Did you click on that and you go back to IU anywhere?
It's like this on this page. Yeah.
Okay, so now hit I agree. Right, you should have a box once you go back, once you've downloaded Citrix, and hit continue. Now where does that take you? It asks you to detect it again.
Yeah.
Detect it again. They're just taking. Anybody? So when anyone hits detect again, what does it do for you?
What you're displaying now.
You got this after you, yeah. So that's what you should, so that's what we're trying to get, right? So once you click on it, you have to like agree to whatever the user thing is, hit continue. It'll look like, it's really weird, because it's like I downloaded it, why is it asking me to activate it again? For whatever reason, you've got to hit that you want to, or not activate, but detect it again. Then once you do that, it should pop you up to what we're now seeing. Right? How many of us got there? Handful. How many of us are having problems? What are we stuck on?
Yeah, just wait for something, so.
It's just taking a long time.
Yeah.
It's probably first week and there's a lot of people and yeah.
Wi-Fi's good.
So hopefully, like I said, I'll post the video, another section where it wasn't downloaded, so you can kind of see that step by step, but what I just described and also what's in the Word document should kind of get you there. Like I said, the kind of clunky thing about it is for whatever reason, it asks you to detect it again, even though you've downloaded it. It's just that once it's downloaded, it has to be detected again that it actually is downloaded. And it might just take a second because it's a little bit, but once you get that done once, you never have to hopefully do that again, right? I might have to do that again if, like I said, I think these are supposed to get wiped every 24 hours, but someone in an earlier class might have been using it. So if you ever switch to a different device, you will have to kind of go through this process, this part of the process. But once you get it on your own personal device, you should just be able to go to IU Anywhere and it'll send you right to this page, okay? All right, so once you're there, we can go to apps, right? Scroll down. Where is it at? I scrolled too far. So Stata or Stata, data, depends on that who you ask, but I usually say Stata. No, I don't know. I go back and forth because I in my head about it too much. So anyway, so Stata SE18. It's going to be a universal license that we can all use at the same time. Going to hit open. Open Citric Workspace Launcher. This might take a second. We'll see how slow this is going to be for me as well. There it is. So you have to have a little bit of patience with this. It can take a little bit of time operating off the cloud like this. And you don't want to go out and buy it because the license is very, very expensive. All right. So this is, oh, okay. Here it is. All right. So this is the Stata icon down here. It's got the program pulled open for me. So I'll kind of walk through some very basics of it. If you haven't got the download yet, don't panic. We'll also have a little bit of time to make sure we can get it going next class, because I'm going to be using a do file that I've got on Canvas. Whoops. So under week one, I've got these week one data files. I'll be looking at this do file next class. We're going to right now, I'm going to show you how to do something with this state cigarette text. So if you want to download this, you can put it on your OneDrive, you can put it on your own personal computer. I'm going to show you ways how we can kind of get this state cigarette text opened up, okay? And if you want to, we're going to go through and how you do this election data as well. Okay? So download these because you can't like open them from Canvas. You actually have to have them on your computer or into your OneDrive. So these are going to be the two that I'm using. They're under files, week one materials, and then week one data files. Okay. And moving forward, excuse me, I'll kind of start moving programs that we're going to be using that line up with the do file that I'm going to show you. So for Thursday's class, you'll see before then, I'm going to throw up that NBA data file and then the NBA do file so that we kind of have those going into Thursday's class. Okay. So here's my program, right? Some very basic. So I went back and forth. So do any of you know, well, you already had it downloaded. So do you know, have you used Stata before? What class users used it for
I
something?
did most stuff Thursday.
Okay, perfect. So it makes life a lot easier. You can do a lot of the same stuff in Excel. Or does anyone have any knowledge on R or Python? So if you know that, this is going to be, I think, easier. It's you know, French and English, you can say the same thing. It's just a different language, right? So this is a little bit more user friendly because I don't believe there's any type of prerequisite that necessarily I can expect that you have any coding knowledge. This is a little bit, interface is a little bit more like user friendly, and you don't have to like know the syntax as well. It can kind of spit out at you what it should be. Okay, so if you ever are interested in R, feel free to reach out. I've got some resources that I think are good ways to start to learn it. I'm actually in the process of translating everything that I have for this class in Stata into R so that I can kind of use both. I probably won't expect people to use R, but if you come in with knowledge, it might be easier for kind of use that instead of Stata, right? But for right now, we're just going to be using Stata. Okay? So one thing we can look at, so we've got these little icons up here. There's a data editor and a data editor, but you're browsing. I would never select this one because if you accidentally edit the data, I mean, you shouldn't be doing that. The data set is what it is. So I generally always kind of say, just open the browser, right? So I've got my web browser that pulls open. I now have the program and my data browser open, but there's nothing here yet. I haven't opened up any files, okay? So we'll go back to the program, and this is where I wish these screens, I might have to play around with the view for next class. Oh, come on. Gonna make this a little bit. Okay, so this is typically, okay. So this is typically how I make this a little bit smaller. So you can type code into here, but I don't think it's really good practice because this isn't being saved anywhere, right? So generally what you should do is you should also go up to this little icon and you want to have a do file as well. So I'm going to click here. Now I've got this little do file. I'm going to make it look kind of weird, but here it is, right? So I can kind of see what my program is doing, while at the same time posting whatever code that I'm running. So here is an example where it's a little bit user-friendly. So if I go to File, Import, and I'm going to try to import the CSV file. So I believe that was the state cigarette tax file. So if you download that, it'll be in your downloads. Mine is on OneDrive, so I hit Import. I'm going to go to this little button here, week 1. So this is my OneDrive, fall 2024, 371, section 37337. Click on that state cigarette tax, hit open, right? Now I believe, since I've got this view all screwed up, oh, where did it go? Well, the view screwed up this, so I got to make it full screen. I was going to try to show you everything at the same time. So down here, there's going to be an OK. I think if I just would have hit enter, it would have executed this as well. But once I've got that file selected, hit OK. Now notice it puts that code, it knows what code to use to import that file, and it puts it all here into the actual program, right? So now, and it puts it on 2 separate lines, which is kind of annoying. Once again, I've got to play around with the view on this computer for next class, so it's not so large, because it's kind of nice to have this all on one line, right? And I'll show you why in a second. So it imported this file, excuse me. If I now go to my program and I go to my data browser, oh, okay. Now I've got all these different states. I've got multiple time periods, and I've got all this information about cigarette taxes and cigarette pack costs, right? So if I've got multiple states, multiple time periods, this is an example of what type of data set we talked about earlier? Panel data, right? So I've got my panel data set open now. Now, one thing that I would do, even if we're using some of these, like, for instance, you can do like summary statistics, or you can do different, there's tons of different, so you could do means, proportions, you can do a bunch of different things, and it'll create the code for you. But then typically what I would do, the best practice is, I'm going to highlight this, copy it, go back up to my do file, and hit paste, and they're going to have to get this to all be on one line, right? So, well, one line, I got to make it so that it's all one text there. This do file, I can then save as day 1 work, or whatever you want to call it, right? Now, if for whatever reason I ever close this out, I can go back to this file and I have the code that will open that file up, and I can just run it again. So, for instance, if I just want to clear the data, I'm going to hit clear here, right? So I'm going to go back and look, okay, there's nothing in here. I don't want to type all this out by hand, but I have it saved in my do file. I can highlight this, hit execute, this little play button, and it runs that code for me, right? So this is a good way to have it to kind of have all of your code in your do file and save it there, okay? Any other questions of that before we keep moving? Did some of you get it to download yet, or is it still thinking? Yeah.
In my case, it is not working because it needs some system administration permission, so.
System administration permission. Okay, that might be a setting on your specific
Yeah.
laptop that you have to, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay, I can help you with it. Okay, so another thing I'll show you that I think is helpful. It's helpful for me because what ends up happening is I do work sometimes in my do file on my personal computer, sometimes on this computer, sometimes another one, sometimes I use my OneDrive. So a lot of the times I'm using the same exact files, but so I might have the same file path, but I've got, so it's the same file, but I'm, instead of using my OneDrive, I'm using my personal computer. So this beginning part is going to be different, right? So a lot of the times what I'll do is I'm like, okay, look, I know that every single time I open a file in this class, I'm going to copy this. It's always going to be in this, and this is the wrong, I selected the wrong section, but you get the idea. It's going to be in whatever the folder that you're using or your OneDrive. So I'm going to go up here and paste that, right? So just whatever that file directory path is. So sometimes mine will be on my iDrive. If it's my personal computer, I just change it so that it's my personal computer where I have it stored there. Now I always know that I'm going to be using kind of this week 1 materials, week 1 data files, and the state cigarette tax. So what I can do is use a $sign and brackets. And then this global, what I need to do is, okay, I want to call this global variable something. So if I ever type in path, this is telling state, okay, create this variable that anytime I put it within this $sign and these brackets, that's what it's going to put in there, right? So it says this global path is this text. So now if I change it, right, and I type path in here, now no matter what computer I'm working on, it's going to put that kind of file directory in there for me. Now, for most of you, you don't have to do this because you're probably always going to be working off of your OneDrive or whatever, you know, if you download them and pull them off of your download folder or wherever you move it to. But if you're moving back and forth in between computers, this can kind of save you, you know, this can make things a little bit handy. And so usually like I would have 2 up here, so that, you know, whichever my OneDrive, but also my personal computer, so I can just kind of go back and forth between the 2. So if I did, I'm going to make this up here for a second. Where are we at? Oh, we're about out of time. So I'll hold off on this. I wanted to show you one more thing before we get out of here. So just to kind of start, we can also then start to manipulate these data sets, right? So I've got this data set imported. I'm going to look at it and say, okay, look, let's assume, and I don't know if this is actually what the variable is, but let's say this tax per pack is the national tax. And then state tax is the amount of the state tax. So the total tax would be the sum of those 2. Well, what we can do is start to create our own variables. So if I use this gen command, I say, I want to create this variable, which is the total tax, right? What do I want it? So I'm creating this new variable and I want it to be the sum of, what was I now forget the names? Tax per pack and state tax. So take tax per pack and add to that also the state tax and create a new variable for me. And you don't have to put spaces in here. I'm putting it in so it's a little bit, you know, just looks a little bit easier to look at. It ignores those spaces. So I'm then going to highlight this. I'm then going to go up to execute that. Now, if I go back to my program, it ran that line of code and it created for me a new variable, which was the total tax, right? If I had to do this by hand, it would take me forever, right? So it's a really, you know, useful, effective, efficient data management system. We are going to start learning how to create variables. You know, we're going to have to start doing regression in here. But this is, you know, once you get downloaded, you got your data browser, you got your do file. Typically, when you're working in data, you're going to have all 3 of those open at the same time. Okay. Any questions for me before we kind of call it here today? So on Thursday, like I said, I'll drag and drop those NBA kind of do files and then data files. So we'll start kind of working on those. We'll kind of finish up some of the review that I wanted to go through. By the end of the week, really hopefully before next class, try to get Stata downloaded. If not, reach out to me. We need to make sure you can get that. after this first week. Also, that background survey kind of helps me start to think about different types of examples I can bring into class. Other than that, hopefully your semester gets off to a great start. Hopefully it starts cooling down here soon, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Question.
Hmm?
How do I get that?